All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our panel on the cannabis tech stack as an open ecosystem. My name's Sarah Stewart. I most recently in cannabis, I ran business development for Leafly, which is the largest online marketplace for cannabis. And as part of that role, I oversaw our integrations with more than 50 software vendors, both within cannabis as well as outside cannabis. I was leading our partnership with Uber as an example. I'm here today with two cannabis software leaders who are also both former operators, which is super interesting. Chris runs a software company called Blaze, and Jeremy leads business development for a software company called Dispense. And I'll let you two, Jeremy, do you want to say a few more words about yourself, and then we'll hand over to Chris?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Sarah. I'm Jeremy. I started in cannabis as a caregiver in the Michigan market in 2008, but then in 2018, transitioned into recreational and helped open a handful of the first recreational dispensaries in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. And that's my experience before that was in software though, and project management. So I always had a background in web development and mobile application development. And when I got into the recreational space, saw some pretty glaring holes, specifically on the e-commerce side. So after about a year and a half on the retail side, I joined Dispense as one of the early hires there to help build out what I believe is a better e-commerce system built to be tailored more towards retailers, specifically like really focused on this idea of having an open ecosystem and integrating with letting people integrate with us and sharing data back and forth. Blaze is one of our integration partners on the POS side, and that's been my focus at Dispense for the past year or so.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. As Sarah mentioned, my name is Chris, CEO, co-founder of Blaze. Former operator back in 2011 out of California, exited in 2014 of that, which love operators, but wanted to solve the problems from the technology side. So had a quick stint at a ad agency and then Amazon Web Services, where I really saw the benefit of what an open ecosystem really looks like and how it can really accelerate not just the business that you're working with, but also the industry. And so we brought that forward with Blaze, and we're very proud to have an open ecosystem and excited to really dig into the panel today. So
Great.
Without further ado, let's get into it.
Right. So we were actually going to just start with a bit of a definition. So we're all sort of talking about the same thing about what an open versus closed tech stack is. So an open tech stack is really enabling your software to communicate on the sort of the narrow end, communicate with other software systems. So send data back and forth, be that patient data, product data. And then on the far end, there's sort of platforms like Shopify, which actually allow you to build on their platform. So build custom skins or build custom applications on their software. And we really have a range in cannabis. We're not sure if we're going to name and shame yet, but there are a few very closed ecosystems, and then there are a lot of sort of open ecosystems, including I think all of the companies that we've worked with. So I was actually going to start with you, Chris.
Sure.
I would love to know how you thought through sort of how to approach integrations for Blaze as you were starting a company. Like what made you decide to have a really open ecosystem for Blaze?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to my experience in cannabis where, back in 2011, really all we had was weed maps. We had to build our own website and build our own e-commerce menu on there. And then we had drivers because we ran delivery service. So we just had all these different technology tool sets that we wanted to talk to each other and we just couldn't. And that was kind of the reality of where I was at. So I wanted to really solve that. And then also, again, watching Amazon Web Services kind of grow, it's really interesting and fascinating that, you can, as a developer, go into the console, of course, and deploy stuff, but you can also do it through, the command line interface. You can do it through an API. You can do it through all these different ways. And so reducing the friction was a big piece. And we'll get to this, but this concept of letting the builders build is something that I was fascinated with. And so that's really where we had started. And then my CTO and I, co-founder, really looked at the technology that was out there. And so from day one, we really had this mindset of building with kind of a microservice-based architecture. So being able to open up our system almost entirely to other providers to really do some cool stuff with it, because we knew there's only so many problems we could solve. but there's some great folks, great partners out there that like Dispense that have done some phenomenal work. And so we don't want to stop that innovation. We wanted to really encourage it. And so that was really the background behind how we built it, why we built an open ecosystem. But at the end of the day, I was trying to solve a pain of my own.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think we were sort of thinking about why this is so important for cannabis. I think cannabis is a particularly fragmented market when it comes to what vendors need from their software, which creates a lot of different software companies and a lot of need for that software to talk to each other, because vendors really do want to mix and match. Got many different sizes of vendors. You've got many different states with different regulations, and it really creates just a lot more permutations of what they can be trying to do and what they want to do and how they want to do it. Jeremy, do you want to talk a little bit about how you approach integrations at Dispense and sort of the ethos behind that?
Yeah, for me, when I joined Dispense, our only POS integration was LeafLogix, and we had that integration before they were purchased by Dutchy. Luckily, I don't know that we would have had it if it hadn't been before that. But from my perspective, we had to diversify if we were going to grow. We needed to bring in FlowHub. We needed to bring in Blaze and Trees and All Leaves. So like my underlying motive was like kind of selfish in the sense that I was a retailer and I like having options. But then from a business perspective, like if we were going to grow our business, I needed other POS partners. And then on top of it, other partners like Spring Big and Alpine, Happy Cabbage in the like loyalty and messaging space. So it just made sense. And our partners are some of our best referrals as well. I mean, the closer we work together, the more, somebody at Blaze can be like, you know what, Dispense is actually the perfect e-commerce fit for you. Or maybe there's another one. So like leaning into those partners and leaning into the being open and flexible was really the driving motivation for us.
Makes sense. And I think open question to both of you, but what have your experiences been, dealing with other vendors in the space? Have you felt like most were very cooperative and open? Have you had mixed experiences?
Yeah, I think a lot of people will front that they are. In theory, it sounds exciting, it sounds cool, but we'll get into the actual execution of it, and we'll talk about kind of the quality of the integration. That's a big deal when we talk about an open ecosystem. How much data can I get back, right? What can I do with that data? Can I just read? Can I write against that data? Those are things that we start to really dig into when we talk about integrations. But for the most part, most of our partners at least are interested in integrating with us. They want to open things up. But then we start to look at what can we do to push the ball forward and not just kind of have a steady state integration. So I don't want to open that conversation up too much yet, but there's a lot to dig into in terms of quality of integration and depth of integration as well.
Yeah.
But for the most part, pretty much we've had some really good partners, which is great. And they're very interested in integrating.
Yeah. I'd say in my experience, it's been 50-50 if people are open to it or not. And like Chris mentioned, sometimes it's just surface level. They say, yeah, we'll integrate. But then, literally one of the driving factors for me flipping to the software side was working in retail and having API keys withheld from me for an integration that I wanted to build on. And when that happened, I just like, it was a chip on my shoulder for me to go and do something better, because that was such a frustrating experience, not being able to use my data the way I wanted to use it, and being kind of held hostage in that situation. So I from my point of view, 50-50, but luckily there are a handful of people who are willing to put in that work and be open.
And sure, if you don't mind, I would love to actually engage the audience a little bit here. I'm sure many folks here have either stitched some systems together, wanted to integrate, but how many times or who here has wanted to integrate something that does not integrate with the other platform you're trying to work with? You guys had any experiences like that? Just one hand. I'm like shocked. Shocked. Two hands. All the time, right? And so when you run into that, it it really slows down your progress in terms of innovation, in terms of moving the business forward. And so I can totally understand where you're coming from when it's like, what do you mean I can't have an API key? What do you mean I can't make these systems talk? This is supposed to be my data. It's supposed to be my system and my business to run this forward. So
Yeah.
I run into that today, even internally at Blaze. It's like, I want to make this talk to this. So sometimes I'll talk to our tech team to try and make it work. But again, we'll talk about quality and what's actually there to integrate with. But it's a big topic and it's frustrating.
Yeah, so I think both of you are touching on something really important, which is usually it's the customer that wants this. Like they want to be able to use whatever mix and match software they want to piece together for their specific use case, which can be as simple as like what part of the store they're fulfilling orders in, and like do they want to use tablets or like a terminal. And they're really often the ones who are actually begging their vendors to talk to each other. Like I've had them put multiple vendors on a call because they were so frustrated that like everyone's telling them something different and not sure what to do. So I think like let's open the Pandora's box, I think, of the restrictions. So as we were preparing for this, we were really talking about how there's really theoretical versus practical restrictions. There's like the theoretical, like, yeah, we're open, we have an integration, but that can mean so many different things. And whether it's actually usable, there's just sort of like a scale from 0 to 100 of like how good and practical it actually is to use what they're putting out there. I think it's very rare that a vendor straight up will say, we won't integrate with you. There is a very notable example right now of Dutchie suing a Kerner in Pennsylvania for saying that they wouldn't integrate. And we can touch on that later because it's another Pandora's box. But usually it's, well, yeah, we want to, but we don't have the dev resources. And it can be really, really hard to pass out whether that's true or it's just a stalling tactic. But I want to, Chris and Jeremy, let's talk about your experiences with this and sort of like some of the more practical barriers you've seen, even when there's theoretical openness to integration, and what you see play out there in practice.
I think from my perspective at Dispense, Sarah, you mentioned it's something that does happen a lot. We're a small team. We're 15 people total. And we have a lot of requests to integrate with us. But it's hard to say yes to all of those because of our lack of bandwidth, essentially. And there's things that we're doing to make that easier for us. One being we're starting to create our first publicly available API and endpoints. Specifically so people can do the work. We don't have to say, oh, you have to wait for our devs to be available. They can do the work of tapping into us. And that's, I think it's important. Well, we'll talk about like probably the resources and allocating in a bit here, but like that's important. And on a very concrete example, like the first thing that we're opening up is we're giving everybody the ability to see the data behind abandoned carts from our e-commerce platform. So people, like Spring Big, Alpine, you guys have your loyalty platform that you're going to be rolling out. You'll be able to tap into it and see, exactly everything about that cart, all the items in there, the name of the items, the brand, the price, the taxes involved. So then you can really start to do very cool things like targeted recapture campaigns or sponsored campaigns with brands. But it takes a lot of resources and effort to get there. So from my perspective, like I hate saying no to people, but sometimes you really do have to just say, no, we have to build this out first.
Was the abandoned cart API a hard sell internally, or was it debated?
A little bit internally, but mostly like nobody thought it was a bad idea to expose that, but it was just the work behind it. And it was actually something that like as a retailer, I pitched Dutchie on that daily. I would be calling, I'd be emailing, for almost 2 years and, never got any progress on it. And so it was something that I brought to the Dispense team immediately upon joining, but it took about 18 months to see it actually happen. And now it's finally like, we're finally getting to see the fruit of all that, which is super cool.
And how did you guys think through the business value of like that, an API like that, and sort of how it would make your platform more valuable to users?
I think, Chris mentioned letting builders build. Like we're great at doing e-commerce, but we can't do everything. We don't do loyalty. We don't do email marketing. And there are people like Alpine and Canna versions is another one that actually kill it in that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
And so we wanted to enable those people to build on top of our platform and make it better.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Actually, one thing I've really seen is when there is reluctance to integrate, it's because they think they're going to do it themselves eventually. It's like, well, we're not going to integrate with any of the loyalty because we haven't decided yet. We might do our own loyalty platform. And I do think there's a little bit of humility needed. And I do think it's sort of changing over time as, years have passed and no one's found the capital to go into all these businesses all up and down the supply chain. But I do think it's often, a lack of humility that leads to that.
I can agree with that.
And I think you guys nailed on a couple of really important topics, which is capital constraints. I mean, we've been hearing about that the entire conference with your brands, a retailer, or even a software provider like us. There's only so much resources we have to go around. And so, when you start to build these companies, you really need to think through what that process is like. And so for us, Jeremy talked about having to hook into all these different providers. Like we actually expose our system to everyone, so they have to integrate with us. So while we can go ahead and kind of push off some of these at the end of the day, your structure, you're going to be capital constrained no matter where you go in this industry. And I think that's why it's so important to have, an open ecosystem within the the cannabis tech stack space, because we can't all solve these problems. Like we're tackling state level, city level problems. We still need to think about the consumer and how important that experience is, and the ability to have your own flavor too. I really enjoy when dispensaries have a real true identity and a sense of community. It takes a lot of technology to drive that. And so being able to give them the freedom to really express themselves, I think is super important. And so we use this phrase, at least at Blaze, a lot, but the right tool for the right job. And look, just to be totally transparent, we just acquired an e-commerce company, yet we integrate with Dispense and we integrate with Leafly and we integrate with everyone else. So go pick the tool. We've got a lot of options for you, but at the end of the day, it's up to the operator to understand what the requirements are and put that back on the vendors, choose the right tool. So we're here for that. We want to help innovation and we want to help lower the barriers to kind of express yourself as a dispenser and give yourself the best shot to make it, because it's tough out there.
Yeah, makes sense. I think as I was sort of like preparing for this, I was thinking through like, what are some examples of closed ecosystems outside of cannabis? And I was like scrolling through my phone, and it wasn't until I got to like the third screen that I found an app that I know doesn't integrate, which is Prime Video, because I worked there for 5 years. Everyone else, like, I think has really recognized that if you want to put consumers first, which is, a central ethos of consumer software, you have to integrate and you have to give them that optionality. And one of my hot takes is actually, I think the companies that will win in cannabis in the software space are the ones that have open ecosystems. And it's not because they have an open ecosystem, but they have an open ecosystem because they are consumer focused, and they will win because they are consumer focused. They believe in giving their consumers optionality, even if maybe, there's some theoretical argument that it might be to the detriment of another one of their business lines. But ultimately, like, they're the ones that will have loyal customers, and they're the ones that will be able to stick it out if they can get the other pieces of the business right. But I think it's a necessary piece. Helene.
Jumping in, I know there's Q&A at the end.
Yeah.
Just on this topic, I think in terms of like measuring optional, like open versus, closed ecosystems and which route you take and when. Right?
Yeah.
So you can be closed and then be open. Maybe it's harder to go backwards the other way. But how at your organizations, how do you have that internal conversation? What are the things that drive the yes or no?
Yeah,
I'll tackle this one first. I mean, again, we started day one with this idea that we're going to be very open because we knew we couldn't tackle everything at once. Do we want to build our own version of every piece of it? Yes, over time, but we know we can't get there, and there's demands now. So when we do talk about an integration where it requires us to go do work, we really have to look at kind of the traditional marks of, hey, how many customers is this impacting? How is this going to affect our business? What's the resource allocation? So we go through that discussion. The other thing that really is a huge factor in that algorithm is we have our own kind of we call it customer like feature request board. And so we are very customer driven when it comes to development. Think of this as like a Reddit style board where if we don't have something, a customer can go in, put in a little ticket, and other customers can upvote it. And it stays anonymous. We don't see who it is, but at the end of the day, we'll pick 5 of the top items being requested. And if we see integrations on there and we see more votes going up, that tells us it's going to drive a lot of value to our customers. And so that's when we really start to assess it and then deploy teams on it. We even have an integrations team specific to doing that stuff at Blaze. So, everyone has those resources, but where you can, it needs to come top down. It's a decision from a strategy perspective, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's right. It starts with a strategy perspective, and sometimes that's an overall ethos, and sometimes it's like a sort of a functionality by functionality thing.
Sure.
And then I think most companies like have an integrations team, and then it's literally like their roadmap, and it's how many stores are you in? What's the business value? How many customers want it?
Right.
But
Yeah.
usually that's a finite number of engineers working on integrations, which is why even the companies that, strategically want to be open, they're still prioritizing the time of 4 engineers. And, people have vacations, sick time, and people quit and have a learning curve when a new person starts. So they're just sort of some of the practical things that play out.
For us, Dispense, again, 15 people. And we've only raised like about $2.5 million. I think it is. So like for us making that decision to open up more and integrate, like it's a much bigger decision because we have to be very picky about how we spend our development time. But it was still an important decision that we really knew we knew what we wanted to do, but it just took us a little bit longer to get there. And so, I think we started a little bit more closed, not because we wanted to be closed, but because we just didn't have the resources to be super open. So it just took us a little bit longer. And I wouldn't say from day one, it was something that we were focused on, but it's becoming more and more important. And we're dedicating more and more time to it, doing things like hiring integration engineers, so that we can give more to that area.
If I could add too, again, once you've built these APIs, you have to maintain them.
Yeah.
And you have to support them, right? And so we've had a number of partners, frankly, DDoS us, not on purpose, but because they wrote some bad code. And so we as an organization need to make sure we build things technically to kind of put that in this bucket, still have our core operations, here. And so we really do look at these microservices intentfully, but it's not just build it and you're done. It is maintenance. And again, what is being passed back and forth. So it's got to be a decision from a strategy perspective to continue to support these things, because you can't just leave it once it's out. It's got to be maintained.
Yeah, makes sense. And another debate I've seen sort of behind the scenes with some of these companies is, you built to my API. No, you built to my API. And I sometimes goes on for a very long time with the customer in the middle being like, somebody built to somebody, what's an API? Just why doesn't it work? How do you guys think about sort of handling that with partners and, figuring out what the right solution is?
I think there's a concrete example here with deals.
Okay.
Deals, I think, and
Deals is a hot potato.
yeah. It's like where's the source?
That's a really good point.
Where's the source of truth? Should deals live in the POS?
Yeah.
Should they live in e-commerce? And what are the different deal types, and how do we make sure that we've standardized that so we can talk back and forth?
Systems. Yeah, deals is a good one.
Yeah, I think when you're looking at these topics, it really comes down to where does it fall and who's got the most sophistication? Because typically, these customers are wanting the best of the best, at least from my point of view. And so when we do look at these systems, it's like, okay, well, let's sit down as a product team and actually look at this. Who's is better? What's the level of effort to get there? And what's the time to get there? So those are some things that we look at when we're deciding, hey, should we integrate here? Should we not integrate? Should you look into us? And half the time it's, do you have an API today that we can even look at? Yeah. And most of the time it's, we have something, but we got to change what payload's being passed back. And so there's work there versus we have something that already exists. We've got webhooks to respond or that you can listen to. So it really just comes down to the sophistication of the tech and kind of figuring out which one should be the foundation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think a lot of times it's a default decision because there's only one way to build.
Yeah.
but in a case like deals, it's like, I think you need to find your source of truth, and you need like, it needs to logically make sense. Like where does that action primarily take place, especially from an operational standpoint? Like, should your inventory team be creating deals in the POS, or should they be creating them somewhere else? And that's like, if you're lucky enough to have options, I think it's like narrowing in your source of truth and where those functions logically make sense sitting.
So do you guys both think that deals, the POS should be the source of truth for deals?
Like I'm biased.
Yeah.
I'll be honest. Yes, I think
That's
so,
what I hear.
because, finance is typically grading these things, or GM is grading these, and they live, they spend, some of our users are in our software for 8+ hours a day. Like that's what they do. And so to be able to go in and create a deal or promotion, schedule them out, to do it like once a month is really useful, not having to get into another software. I think we haven't even talked about this yet, but you look at these larger MSOs, these larger players, like you have data security you need to really take seriously. And the more people that have access to more systems, that person leaves, you have to deprovision across multiple solutions. And so I've not seen a single sign-on or any kind of authentication yet that what I would take as kind of table stakes in any other software. We need to step it up there. There's no doubt about it. But you also need to look at the risk exposure when you're talking about what is the truth system, or what is the system of truth, and how much you have invested there. So for all those reasons, I say the POS, because they need logins anyways to this. And so the more the other systems you have are great, but do they really need admin permissions? I mean, I've seen a number of rogue employees go and just, I wouldn't say nuke the platform, but if they don't have the right permissions, they're not deprovisioned properly, they can control the system, and that is a dangerous thing. So I'm not saying they shouldn't, deals shouldn't belong in e-commerce. There's definitely a place for them. But at the end of the day, I would argue that the source of truth should be the point of sale for these.
Yeah.
I tend to agree. Deals should live in the point of sale. The only like maybe small argument for it on e-commerce, living in e-commerce, is like the actual, huge component of deals is being able to advertise that deal. And where do you do that? You do that on your website mostly. So like from a marketing perspective, marketing teams want to be creating those deals to make sense online. And so that's where they're focused, whether it's like the product images or the banners that are promoting the deals, and they want to be able to schedule it so that, a week in advance, they can set their deals, schedule it, and then the banners turn on automatically, the prices adjust automatically. But there's no reason that you can't, from an like inventory standpoint, like create that deal in the POS, pass that technical deal information over, and then go into the e-commerce and create that front end. I think that one's probably one of the more complicated ones, which is why I brought it up, but probably lives in the POS.
I think it's a good point to jump off on quality of integration too, because this is where we get into kind of the details here, the nuance of, okay, well, I've got this product API that returns back prices for a particular product, but if there's like a sale going on, there's like a strike through on the price from $20 to $15. Is that being passed back to a dispense? And oftentimes that's no.
Yeah.
And so therefore, I do need to create these things and replicate the effort inside in the e-commerce platform. So that's just one example of quality. We can go very deep in this. But that to me, we at Blaze at least return a lot of data back to our providers, again, to let them build something really cool. We don't want to limit them. So we can talk about that.
Audience question.
I got a question. I know that there's Q&A after.
No, jump in.
I feel very strongly about everything you're talking about right now. Like single sign-on relates back to that, etc. What is the source of truth? Who the fuck knows? But something I'm really curious about is standards, consortiums, agreements across data schemas, endpoints, stuff like that. I mean, that's something that software companies have benefited. I mean, talk about AWS, talk about Terraform, talk about like cloud compatibility across Azure and AWS and so forth. Is the industry, in y'all's opinion, ready to start agreeing with each other across the trees and the blazes and and the dispenses and everyone else, because at the end of the day, you're just kind of playing ball with each other, passing data back and forth.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think we're actually getting into that next, this hot potato issue almost. And we're gonna go into it from a catalog perspective as just one example, but yeah, I think there's less noise in the space now, whereas providers, I want to say we've achieved some steady state from a software perspective, but we're getting there. Industry is maturing more. Players are coming to the top and staying at the top. We're seeing less volatility. So once you have that stability, we can start to have these discussions, right? Whether it be around the product catalog, whether it be around certain standards and how we pass data back and forth. Look, I would love to see it, and we'd be the first ones to participate in that. I just think that there's a lot of problems in the space. That's partly why I love it as an entrepreneur. There's a lot of things to go solve. It's just where's that stack from a priority perspective for everyone, not just for Blaze, but for Dispense and
I was going to say
and
exactly
everyone
the same
else. So
thing.
it needs to happen though.
I've had multiple companies reach out wanting to work on it or wanting to be part of it. I think there's a lot of theoretical willingness, but like no one has time.
Yeah.
Like I think until all these companies have more money, more runway, more time to focus on long-term things, like everyone wants to participate, but like no one wants to actually devote, a staff member or more to go actually like write the code and drive alignment.
Yeah,
we just don't have the bandwidth.
It's like this is the way.
Everyone's running too lean.
And just to jump in, we're seeing that a little bit, like in California, we're working on this universal barcode program with trees, with Nabis. Like that's the first real collaboration we've seen where there's actually, go get something from GitHub and it's like there and there's documentation and it's nice. So
this is Ed's project or?
Yeah, correct. Our product manager, Ed Swartz, is running this, but that's the start of it. So I'm hopeful we can start and get some movement, some momentum, and then we can talk about scaling it out to not just, certain states, but across the entire US and hopefully to Canada. I mean, Canada's done fairly well with the OCS and actually having a standard catalog. It's pretty nice actually. So I'd love to see it happen in the US, but the fragmentation per states is it's a lot of work.
So in that case, Chris, is Blaze putting up the resources to take the lead on that?
It's a collaboration. So there was a collaborative effort from an architecture standpoint on the Open QR consortium. And then from there, we didn't actually put up any devs to work on it. We just put forward kind of the architecture and logic that we wanted to see. And then we have been integrating into it now.
Okay.
So I believe Nabis took a lot of the
heavy lifting
on that from what I know.
I think that's one thing that I see a lot of people trying to solve these issues, and I think it's important for us as like some of the larger software players in the space to just be supportive of them. We don't always know if it's going to work out. There's people pitching solving the catalog issue all the time, and it's like, do I trust that you're going to figure this out? I don't know, but I'm here to help you. And if we can lend support, we're there to lend it. But it's kind of like, it's almost like betting on different people to come up with solutions.
Yeah, catalog's a big one, I think, the biggest. And we've not coalesced around a solution as an industry.
Yeah.
We've talked about it on how many panels over the last 2 days, like it's coming up all the time.
Audience question, the lady in black.
So what do you think the path forward is? Is it building a group to get on the same page about standardization? Is it like the person with the most resources just gonna muscle through and then people are gonna tack on like you guys were talking about?
Yeah.
Like it's obviously needed, but like where's an emergency? So why isn't it happening?
The way I would describe how to solve this problem is, garbage in, garbage out. So where does it start? Where's the data entry actually start?
Yeah.
That is to me where the problem should be solved, because beyond that, you're spending a lot of resources from a compute standpoint, from a knowledge standpoint to transform data that, okay, like we can do that. It's definitely possible. But my point of view, it all starts where the track and trace happens, where that data first goes in, that strain first goes in. Why isn't it being normalized there? Why is that why are these systems allowing it to just continue to grow and become a mess? And so hit it at the foundation of the problem rather than trying to create like a supercharger kind of in the middle to just transform all this data, because it's expensive. Who's going to run that infrastructure? I've seen massive compute workloads not in the cannabis industry, but outside,
Yeah.
it's a lot to maintain. So
It's also error prone.
yeah, and it's also not perfect at the same time.
It's also kind of a compliance issue too.
Yes,
Like
to
if
some
things are being entered incorrectly or in multiple variations, like that can cause compliance issues. So like I'm with Chris on this. Like I think it starts at the track and trace level.
I think the broader question, she's going to put pressure on them, right? To do this, they need to be motivated and incentivized to do this. And I think this is going to help the industry push forward. So whether it's us up
Mhm.
here driving, toward,
Do they need?
that's my question.
Yeah.
I would love to know, because I think it's going to benefit the entire industry. And I think frankly, you could probably monetize it.
And will they put that money towards that problem? Do they care? But that's where I think, like you're saying, put the pressure on, like force them to put money towards it.
Yeah.
Good questions.
So we're almost at time. I want to make sure we have 10 minutes for audience questions, I think. So I want to turn it over. Do we have other audience questions? I want to make sure we've hit on what people are actually interested in talking about. Yes.
I have a question on where, and maybe just dovetailing off of this, starting at the track and trace. Do local state regulations, you always have to implement state regulations, but are you seeing any of them get in the way of being an open ecosystem? So you mentioned the leaf data system.
Okay.
We don't need to unpack, but there is some commentary there that the state of Pennsylvania isn't allowing changes that they control. You can't do a GitHub push of a change. Pennsylvania has a written request for any feature or any software change to their state management. So how is that impacting the ability to do certain open things?
I can take that unless you guys.
Go for it.
Yeah, I mean, that is the heart of the lawsuit, I think, is what the state provides. But actually, as I read through that lawsuit, the thing I was most surprised about was that they had anything at all in the statute about integrations.
Right.
Like they had this paragraph, the whole thing is about this paragraph that says that the track and trace has to provide a two-way integration for other software vendors. I've actually not seen that in any other state. It might be out there. I haven't read all of them, but I've actually never heard of that. At another state being that specific in their software. I don't know if you guys have seen that. It's dangerous though, I think, when a institution like government, which is naturally slow to make changes, tries to get too specific about software regulation. I think in Pennsylvania, it's good that they had the clause about two-way integration, but also government, as we've seen with social media and everything.
I will say, there are a lot of the other providers out there outside of Leaf Data, the metrics BioTracks, they're fairly good about this. They want people to integrate, but at the same time, they do have their terms and conditions you need to abide by, just like any of us would ask for. So I think it just goes back to motive at the end of the day. If you are the core solution that we're hooking into, like how much can we do with the data? How much can we push the system, and are they motivated to actually make any changes? That's where I'm coming from. And I would love to see more change, but I want to know, I don't know if regulation is necessarily limiting that, or if it's just these providers that are just like, I'm doing what I said I would do in my contract and nothing more than that.
I think I've seen it create real issues. You take a situation where with like a company who has operations in multiple states, if they're used to using one POS system, but then you have a state like Pennsylvania that says you have to use this POS system, then they have to rewrite their entire SOPs. Like that's crazy to make a company do that. I'm in Pennsylvania specifically, I've seen people that will just continue to use their POS system and then like export that data and manually import it because it's easier to do that than to retrain your entire staff.
Wild.
Yeah. So it's like, it is causing real issues, unfortunately.
It makes it so you can't have a consistent tech stack state to state if you're in OSO.
Correct. Yeah.
It's challenging.
Yeah, and I've seen that a lot too. Just
we spend
using 4 different POS systems.
We spend a lot of time at Blaze to make sure that your experience on Metric and BioTrack, you don't know the difference, frankly. When you log into our system, the compliance management system is the exact same because we've spent so much time interpreting the difference between those two systems. And, like I said, and I've continued to say, about 50% of our team are former operators. So it's really straightforward from a product angle to be like, okay, well, BioTrack uses a barcode. Got it. This is what Metric uses, or the same thing. And let's make that interface common for these operators that want to scale across. But it's interesting because both platforms have different endpoints and different ways to expose data, different rate limiting too. That's a new thing being introduced, which is quite fun. So there's a lot to unpack on those topics.
All right.
One more question.
All right, Helene.
In terms of lobbying efforts across like, you know, what I believe needs to happen, and I'm sure there's like individual lobbying efforts, but you know, cannabis software prohibition, you know, every new state that comes online starts to implement these like wacko regs because the people in those states have that interest.
Yeah.
But like it just seems that it's really necessary for all the different software companies to put together shared lobbying dollars for new states to come on board, because they're building out these, you know, initial laws are gonna be so hard to rewrite.
Yeah, I would love to see something like that, not just from the software side, but just from like a increasing accessibility to the entire industry. I think, you know, I think Dutchy has probably done the most work in terms of like lobbying from a software company. I do think it's like a little unfortunate that it's just like solely focused on them. Like in New York, they're like, we'll give away our software for free. And like they haven't, I feel like they haven't unfortunately represented the whole industry. And I wish there was more, you know, I know that's something that like we feel, Chris and Dispense, like we feel like very adamant that we're happy to like work with people, but like we don't have the same resources that a company like that has. And so I just wish that everybody could be brought to the table, and that isn't happening right now.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure the conversation has been had. It's just more of a question of like.
It's money again, I think.
Yeah. I mean, look, I'll
Do you
give a lot of
have money?
credit to Kyle at FlowHub. He's been very active for a long time in trying to push these things forward. So, but as soon as you start doing that, you've got other problems that need to be solved too. So it's like, where's your attention going from an executive team? Look, I would love to be involved in this stuff and love to push things forward. We've been very active with the OCM in New York. We've been pushing and trying to talk about some of these constraints and some of these issues and challenges we've seen in other states, and they've been open to it. So that's good news. But how to do that at the national level, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
So we heard a lot about how integration is a pain in the ass.
Yeah.
I'm curious to hear what are the top problem statements in retail specifically, because that's where y'all live. What are the top integration, or what are the top problem statements that warrant thinking about integration?
Yeah, I'll take this first pass of this. I'm going to put this in a problem statement. The retailers are having issues understanding customers online and in store, stitching that behavior together and seeing how that changes. They don't have a clear pane of glass there. And so that's something that we're really interested in solving. But I think that's a big one because the behavior is very different. And so that it's really difficult to pull together the activity on a website. Yes, you can see abandoned carts, but like on Google Analytics, usually on a website, you're going to tag things very in depth. My prior background, I helped run Samsung.com. We were tracking every single mouse click they were doing and trying to stitch together that journey and that behavior so that we can then influence and push them in the right direction. There's none of that today, and how that traverses back in store too. There's not a clear pane of glass yet.
Warranting e-commerce and POS?
Has to.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Has to.
A very concrete example from my experience is like, a lot of my background is in SEO as well. And so like, I really, as a marketer on the retail side, I really wanted to leverage my POS data, the product data inside of the POS to drive traffic to my website. But I couldn't do that back in 2020 because Jane and Dutchy were iframe based, and Google has a really hard time crawling iframes. And then even if they can, they'll attribute it to the original domain. So like anything that I was doing was Dutchy was getting credit for, and we were driving traffic to Dutchy. And so like when I wanted to do, like, Dutchy wouldn't open it up to let me do what I wanted. So that required me to go find a different provider, but then they wouldn't integrate with that provider. So that was a very real issue that like more like that's literally why I left retail and came to technology to help facilitate those kinds of problems.
And I think those kind of problems can like also play out over several months as you're like going back and forth between vendors, and then all of a sudden like several months have passed and you're
I got
still not
tired of
running your
waiting.
business the way you're wanting, you know, which is hard.
I think the other problem statement I would say is loyalty and promotions. You know, there's so much
Yes.
discounting going on today. Are things being double stacked? Are they not? You know, in that case, you really need a trifecta. You need a three-part integration almost between the point of sale, e-com, and if there's a loyalty partner,
Yeah,
that all needs to talk. It can't just be, okay, e-com to POS. No, it's the full journey that needs to tie out and validate in real time. And so that is a problem we're solving right now, but that's another problem where people are over discounting. Things are being stacked when they shouldn't be stacked. And so the thin margins are now non-existent when that happens. So
Taxes too.
oh,
Oh, dude, that's-
taxes, yeah. we didn't
that's
talk about
frankly
taxes.
taxes is, especially in California, and the way they were done. That's why we built some of our systems to have such an open ecosystem, because we were the only ones that could calculate the taxes right, because it was based off of cost of goods, which is crazy, but that was how it was done. And so, you know, there's a lot of providers that wouldn't accept our results, and so, or our APIs, they would just do the taxes on their own, and then you have mismatches on totals. If you're collecting payment online, now you got to refund it and reauthorize and recapture the payment. Like,
Customers get upset.
it's a mess. So that's another reason why I say like the POS, in my opinion, should be the source of truth, especially when it comes to taxes.
All right, we are at time, so thank you for coming. Thank you, Jeremy. If anyone wants to chat about this topic, I think there's a lot of people passionate about it, so yeah,
Talk for
feel free
days.
to talk to us or talk to each other, but we could all talk for days on this. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.